Picture a man crouched by a river, thousands of years before metal. He is holding a flake of volcanic glass, freshly struck, with an edge sharper than most modern steel, and he is dragging it across his own jaw. There is no soap. No mirror, just his reflection in the water, broken by the current. Every stroke risks opening his face, and in that world, an infected cut is not a minor inconvenience. It is a genuine way to die. He does this anyway, every few days. He has decided that whatever the beard is costing him is worse than the risk of the blade. That decision is the whole story, and it's the part almost everyone gets wrong. We assume men started shaving because someone decided it looked better. But look at what shaving actually demanded in the ancient world. Effort. Every few days, forever. A sharp edge held against the throat and the jaw. Real risk of cutting yourself in an era with no antiseptic. All to remove something that grows back for free, that keeps your face warm, and that your body spends energy producing on purpose. Nobody goes to that trouble for aesthetics alone. Something was wrong with having a beard. And our ancestors worked out exactly what. Start with the how, because the how is far older than most people assume. Long before metal, humans had access to blades that were, in pure sharpness, extraordinary. When you strike a flake off a piece of flint or obsidian, the edge that comes away can be a few molecules thick, finer than a modern steel razor, and sharp enough that it will part skin before you have registered that it touched you. Obsidian, which is volcanic glass, is so effective at this that surgical blades have been made from it in the modern era, and some surgeons have argued they leave cleaner cuts than steel. Our ancestors had this material, understood it deeply, traded it across enormous distances, and shaped it with a level of skill that took a lifetime to learn. So the capability was there long, before anyone got around to using it on their own face. And there are hints they did. Scraping tools, worn in particular patterns, that suggest use against skin rather than hide or wood. Depictions of clean faces in early art. The suggestion, scattered through the evidence, that people were removing facial hair with stone edges deep in prehistory, sometimes by cutting it close, sometimes by scraping it away, and sometimes by pulling it out entirely with shells or bone pincers used as tweezers, which was a genuinely common approach across the ancient world. And every bit as unpleasant as it sounds. Then, metal arrived, and shaving changed permanently. Copper razors appear in the Bronze Age, and bronze razors follow them across the ancient world, turning up in graves from Egypt to Scandinavia, often as prized possessions buried alongside their owners. Think about what that means for a moment. A man is buried with the things that defined him, his weapons, his valuables, and his razor laid in the ground beside him for whatever came next. That is not a disposable object, and it is not a trivial one. That is equipment that mattered enough to take into the afterlife. And nowhere did it matter more than in ancient Egypt, where being clean-shaven was close to an obsession. Egyptian men shaved their faces and often their heads. They had dedicated razors of copper and bronze, and there were professional barbers who worked outdoors, moving between clients. Being unshaven in that culture was a sign that something had gone wrong, that a man was in mourning, or ill, or unable to maintain himself, or simply not Egyptian. Which brings us from the how to the why. And the first reason is the one nobody wants to think about. Lice. A beard is warm, dense, and hard to clean. And that combination makes it excellent habitat. Facial hair can host lice and other parasites, and in a world without shampoo, without hot running water, and without any concept of what an infection actually was, an infestation was not a small annoyance to be scratched at and forgotten. It meant relentless itching, and relentless itching meant broken skin, and broken skin in that world was an open door for something far worse than the parasite that caused it. Lice have traveled with humanity through its entire history, and body lice in particular have carried devastating disease from one person to the next. Now, think about what a blade does to that problem. Remove the hair and you remove the habitat, not treat it, not manage it, but eliminate the place the parasite lives. It is a permanent, physical solution that requires no medicine, no theory of contagion, and no understanding of what a louse even is. All it requires is the observation, repeated across enough people and enough generations that it hardens into common sense that men who kept their faces and heads bare simply had fewer problems than men who did not. Nobody needed to know why it worked. They only needed to notice that it did. That's not vanity. That's public health, discovered by trial and error, remembered by a community, and enforced by custom law, before anyone could have explained the mechanism behind it. The Egyptians again pushed this furthest. Their obsession with bodily cleanliness was deeply tied to religion, and to the practical realities of living in a hot, crowded river valley. Removing hair from the face, the head, and often the entire body was part of staying clean in an environment where staying clean genuinely mattered. The second reason is quieter, and it's about everything else a beard collects. Consider eating in a world with no napkins, no cutlery as you know it, and no soap. Food, grease, dust, wood smoke, blood from butchering. Everything a person touches in a day, and a beard catches all of it. Then it holds on to it. Add a shortage of clean water for washing in many regions, and facial hair stops being neutral and becomes a chore, something that has to be actively maintained, or it turns into a problem all by itself. Shaving removes the chore entirely. It's the difference between managing something every day and simply not having it to manage. The third reason is the one that turns shaving from grooming into equipment. A beard is a handle. In close combat, the wrestling, grappling, knife-range fighting that decided most ancient violence long. Before anyone was killing at a distance, a fistful of hair is a gift to your enemy. Grab a man's beard and you control his head. Control his head and you control his whole body. You can pull him off balance, drag him down, wrench his chin up, and lay his throat open for whatever you are holding in your other hand. This is not a theoretical concern dreamed up by historians. It is the obvious, immediate consequence of fighting at arm's length, and soldiers throughout history have understood it perfectly well without needing anyone to explain it. The most famous version of this story attaches to Alexander the Great, who is said to have ordered his soldiers to shave before battle for precisely this reason, so that enemies would have nothing to seize hold of. Whether that order was given exactly as the story tells, it is debated, the way most colorful ancient anecdotes are, and it may well have grown in the retelling. But the logic sitting underneath it is entirely sound, and it was clearly understood by people whose lives depended on getting these details right. In a world where fights were settled within a body's length, walking into one with a built-in handle attached to your face was a real and unnecessary disadvantage. Shaving was a small tactical edge, and small tactical edges are exactly what armies are built out of. So far, every reason has been practical. Parasites, cleanliness, combat. But the fourth reason is the one that made shaving permanent, and it has nothing to do with practicality at all. It's about who you are. Once enough men in a society shave, the beard stops being neutral. It becomes a marker. And markers are how humans have always sorted the world into us and them. In Egypt, clean-shaven faces became so tightly bound up with Egyptian identity that beards were associated with foreigners, with desert peoples, with the outsiders beyond the valley. To be bearded was to be visibly not one of us, in a society that cared enormously about that distinction. In Rome, the same logic hardened into something almost explicit. Romans through many periods were clean-shaven as a matter of course, while the peoples beyond their borders, the ones they lumped together, and called barbarians, were bearded, and the contrast was noted, drawn, and sculpted often enough that it became part of how Romans pictured themselves against everyone else. The face became a flag. A stranger's jaw announced, before he had opened his mouth or said a single word in any language, which world he had come from, and whose side he was likely to be on. And this is the point where a habit becomes a rule. When shaving is only practical, a man can weigh the cost against the benefit and decide for himself, and nobody much cares what he concludes. But when shaving is identity, opting out is no longer a private preference. It is a public statement that you are not one of the group. And for a deeply social species whose entire survival strategy has always run on belonging, that cost is far higher than an itchy chin or an hour a week with a blade. This is why the custom spread and why it stuck so hard. Not because the parasites got worse, and not because anyone invented a better razor, because the meaning got heavier. There's a fifth reason, and it's the strangest one, because it turns shaving into something sacred. In Egypt, priests took hair removal to an extreme, shaving their entire bodies. This wasn't hygiene alone, though hygiene was certainly part of it. It was purity. Hair was regarded as unclean in a ritual sense, something belonging to the animal and the earthly. And a body stripped bare of it was a body considered fit to enter a temple and approach a god. Shaving, in that context, was not grooming at all. It was a religious act performed before the most important work a man could do. And here you get one of the most wonderfully strange details in the whole history of human grooming: the false beard. Egyptian pharaohs, who were otherwise scrupulously, obsessively clean-shaven, wore an artificial, tightly braided ceremonial beard, manufactured for the purpose and strapped onto the chin for formal occasions. You can see it on the statues and the death masks, that narrow, plaited, unmistakably fake beard jutting from the chin of a ruler, who had carefully removed every trace of the real one that morning. It was a symbol of divine authority, and it was worn precisely because the natural version had been abolished. Sit with that for a second, because it tells you exactly how far this journey had traveled. The natural beard had become so loaded with meaning and so thoroughly banished from respectable faces that a fake one had to be manufactured and worn as a badge of godhood. At that point, facial hair has nothing whatsoever to do with warmth or protection or anything a body grows it for. It is pure signal, cut loose from biology entirely and controlled completely by culture. So put the whole arc together, because it runs in a clear direction, and each stage makes the next one possible. Shaving began as a practical solution to real problems: parasites living in the hair, filth, with nowhere else to go, a ready-made handle for an enemy's fist. Then, as more and more men did it, the clean face quietly became a way to recognize your own people, and the bearded face became the mark of the outsider. And finally, once that meaning had set hard, the whole thing turned into ritual, ceremony, law, and status, a thing done not because it solved anything, but because it was simply what people like you did and had always done. Only at the very end of that long chain did it become anything like taste. So come back now to a bathroom. This morning, with the light on, you stood in front of a mirror and dragged a blade across your own throat, and it did not strike you as remarkable. You have hot running water and soap and a blade engineered to a tolerance those ancient craftsmen would have found miraculous. Every single problem that started this habit has been solved by something else. You are not fighting off lice. You are not being seized by the beard at knife range by a man. Who wants your throat? Your face is not the only way a stranger can tell where you come from. The reasons are gone. The ritual stayed. Every one of the forces that built this habit has quietly retired, and the habit itself never noticed. That's the thing about a habit that old. It doesn't need its original justification anymore, because somewhere along the way it stopped being a solution and became simply what people do. Every morning, in front of a mirror, men perform a small ancient ceremony against parasites. They don't have enemies they'll never fight and think they're just getting ready for work. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. We make videos like this one every week about ancient human behavior, about what your body still remembers, and about the gap between the world you were built for and the one you actually live in. If that is something you want more of, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth keeping alive. See you in the next one.